The photograph sat on the mantel in my grandfather's study, slightly faded, gathering dust. Him in his dress blues from 1968, young and sharp-eyed, before Vietnam took pieces of him he never got back. Next to it, a newer frame, my brother in a suit, shaking hands with some senator at a fundraiser. Between them, an empty space where a third photo should have been, if anyone in the family had thought to ask for one. I stood in that study the day after he died looking at the gap and understood that I'd been living in that empty space for 20 years. My name is Ashley Dillard, I'm 44 years old, and I'm a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. I've served in 3 combat zones, commanded a Marine Expeditionary Unit, and earned decorations I'm not allowed to discuss at family dinners. Not that anyone asks. My family thinks I work in military administration, something with paperwork probably. Something that explains why I'm always traveling but never interesting at parties. They decided this 15 years ago when I made Major and couldn't explain exactly what I did in Fallujah, and I'd long since stopped correcting them. It was easier that way, easier than competing with my brother's hedge fund success or my sister's social media empire. Easier than watching my uncle, my father's brother, the family patriarch after Grandpa retired from active involvement, dismiss everything I said because it didn't generate revenue or social capital. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my quarters at Camp Pendleton, reviewing readiness reports, when my phone rang. My sister Janice. "Grandpa died last night," she said without preamble, peacefully, in his sleep. I set down my pen very carefully. "When's the service?" "Saturday. At St. Michael's. Can you make it, or are you deployed or whatever?" "I'll be there." "Good, Mom wants all of us there. Uncle Preston is handling arrangements. You know how he is. He wants it perfect." She paused. "Try to keep a low profile, okay? This is about Grandpa, not about, work stuff." I understand. I didn't, actually, but I'd learned not to argue. My grandfather was the reason I joined the Marines, not because he pushed me. He never did. But because I'd spent my childhood watching him quietly maintain his dignity in a family that had moved on from military service to more practical pursuits. He'd served 30 years, retired as a master sergeant, and spent the rest of his life being treated like a relic from a bygone era. "Your grandfather lives in the past," Uncle Preston used to say, usually after Grandpa had mentioned something about his service. "It's important to move forward, build something real." Real meant money. Real meant status. Real meant my brother's penthouse in Manhattan and my sister's verified Instagram account with 500,000 followers. Real did not mean the Marine Corps, apparently. I'd tried to tell them once, at Thanksgiving 7 years ago, what I actually did. Tried to explain that I commanded 2,000 Marines, that my decisions affected operations across the Pacific Theater, that generals sought my counsel. Uncle Preston had patted my shoulder. "That's wonderful, honey, but when are you going to settle down? Find someone? You're not getting any younger." Yanis had added, "Military careers are fine for a while, but there's no real growth potential. You should think about transitioning to the private sector. I know people who hire veterans for corporate security." My brother hadn't said anything. He just looked at me with something like pity, as if I was still playing dress-up while the adults did real work. Grandpa had caught my eye across the table. He'd smiled, sad, knowing, and changed the subject. That was the last time I tried to explain. The flight from San Diego to Philadelphia took 5 hours. I spent it in civilian clothes, reading briefing documents, and trying not to think about the fact that the one person in my family who understood what I did was gone. My phone buzzed constantly, condolences from fellow officers, a message from the commandant himself, orders for the memorial service that I'd file away and not mention. The Marine Corps takes care of its own, and my grandfather, decades removed from active duty, was still one of us. I'd called the priest at St. Michael's 3 days ago, Father Thomas, who'd known my grandfather for 40 years. The conversation had been brief. He left specific instructions, Father Thomas had said, for the military honors. He wanted you to deliver them. Did he say why? He said it was time the family understood who you are. His words exactly. I'd sat with that for a long moment. Did he tell anyone else? He asked me not to. He said it should be a surprise. Father Thomas had paused. "He was very proud of you, Colonel. He wanted to make sure everyone knew it." even if it disrupts the service? He said especially then. So here I was, following my grandfather's last wish, about to detonate a truth bomb in the middle of his memorial service. He'd set the trap from beyond the grave, and I was going to spring it. I arrived at my parents' house Friday evening. The driveway was full. My brother's Tesla, my sister's Range Rover, Uncle Preston's Mercedes. I parked my rental at the curb and grabbed my overnight bag. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. "Ashley, thank God you're here." She hugged me tightly. "It's been so hard. Preston's been handling everything, but you know how he gets. He's turned the memorial into a production. I'm sure it'll be beautiful." "It will, but I miss Dad," she pulled back, studying my face. "You look tired. Are they working you too hard at wherever you are?" "Camp Pendleton." "And no, I'm fine." Camp Pendleton, right. She said it like it was a small regional office rather than one of the largest Marine Corps bases in the country. "Come in." Everyone's in the living room. Everyone turned out to be 15 people, extended family, close friends, all gathered to remember my grandfather and, apparently, to discuss the service logistics. Uncle Preston stood at the center like a general marshalling troops, though he'd never served a day in uniform. He was tall, silver-haired, successful, a real estate developer who'd made millions and never let anyone forget it. "Ashley!" He greeted me with a handshake that felt like a business transaction. "Good of you to make it. I know your schedule is probably very flexible." I requested leave. Right, military leave. Very generous, I'm sure. He turned back to the group. "As I was saying, we need to keep the service moving. People have busy schedules. 2 hours maximum. That's what I told Father Thomas." My brother, who'd been sitting on the couch with his wife, looked up. "Are we still doing the open mic portion, where people share memories?" "Yes, but we need to keep it brief. 5 minutes each, maximum. I'll go first. I've prepared some remarks about Dad's business acumen. Then you can share something about the lessons he taught you. Yanis, you're after that." "What about Ashley?" my mother asked. Uncle Preston glanced at me. "Of course. She can share something too. Keep it light though. People don't want to hear about military stuff. This is a celebration of Dad's life, not a history lesson." I smiled and said nothing. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The room was exactly as I'd left it when I joined the Marines at 22. Posters of fighter jets, a shelf of military history books, my high school track trophies gathering dust. Downstairs, I could hear Uncle Preston holding court, his voice carrying through the floor. He was telling a story about my grandfather, editing it to fit his narrative. The wise patriarch who'd supported Preston's early business ventures, who'd understood that success meant evolution beyond military service. It was a lie, but it was a comfortable lie, one the family had been telling for decades. My phone buzzed, a text from Major Barra, my XO service tomorrow. "We can send a detail if you want." I typed back, "Not necessary, personal matter." Another message, "Understood. But ma'am, he was a Marine. He deserves the honors." "He'll get them," I replied. I thought about my grandfather's last request, about the instructions he'd left with Father Thomas, about the trap he'd set, not out of malice, but out of love, because he wanted his family to finally see what they'd been refusing to acknowledge for 20 years. I thought about my brother's pity, my sister's condescension, Uncle Preston's dismissal, about living in that empty space on the mantle, invisible despite everything I'd accomplished. Tomorrow I'd step out of that space. Tomorrow, they'd have to look. St. Michael's was packed, 300 people, maybe more. My grandfather had lived a long life, touched many people. The church smelled like lilies and old wood and the kind of solemn dignity that Catholic churches seem to hold in their stones. I sat in the second row with my immediate family. Uncle Preston was in the front, of course, along with his children. My brother sat beside me in an expensive suit, checking his phone periodically. My sister was in the row behind us, her husband whispering something that made her stifle a laugh. Father Thomas conducted the service with gentle authority, prayers, hymns, a eulogy that captured my grandfather's quiet strength without revealing the full depth of his service. He'd seen combat in Vietnam, earned a Bronze Star, led men through hell. But Father Thomas kept it vague, respecting the family's unspoken wish to downplay the military aspects. Then came the memory sharing. Uncle Preston went first. He spoke for 10 minutes about my grandfather's wisdom, his business sense, his advice that had helped Preston build his real estate empire. It was a good speech, well-rehearsed, that made my grandfather sound like a Fortune 500 consultant, rather than a Marine who'd survived the Tet Offensive. My brother went next. He talked about weekend fishing trips, about lessons in patience and discipline. He made it sound like motivation for his hedge fund success, as if Grandpa's teachings were primarily about maximizing quarterly returns. Yanis spoke about his kindness, his support when she started her social media business. She cried prettily, her makeup still perfect, and the audience murmured sympathetically. Then Father Thomas looked at me. Would anyone else like to share a memory? I started to stand. Uncle Preston's voice cut through the church, stage whispered but clearly audible. Keep it short. People are tired. His smile was indulgent, patronizing. Around us people nodded. It was 11:45 a.m. We'd been here an hour. Everyone wanted to get to the reception, to the food and drinks, and the easier part of mourning. I looked at Uncle Preston, at that smile, at the assumption in his eyes that I understood my place in this family hierarchy, grateful to be included, careful not to take up too much space. I sat back down. The church relaxed, a few people checked their watches. My brother's phone buzzed and he glanced at it quickly. Father Thomas cleared his throat. The sound carried through the church like a bell. Before we conclude, he said, his voice taking on a different quality, formal, official, there is one final matter. Colonel Dillard will now deliver the military honors. Your grandfather requested it specifically in his will. The church went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a service ending, but the shocked silence of a record scratch, of reality breaking. I stood up. This time, no one smiled. No one whispered. They just stared. Colonel? My brother's voice was faint. I walked to the front of the church. Father Thomas handed me a folded document. My grandfather's service record, the one I'd requested from the National Archives. Then he handed me the shadow box that had been waiting behind the altar, hidden from view. Inside was my grandfather's Bronze Star, his Purple Heart, his Vietnam Service Medal. All the decorations he'd earned and never displayed, because his family had decided his service was something to be acknowledged briefly and then moved past. I turned to face the congregation. 300 people, all of them watching me with varying degrees of confusion. Master Sergeant Thomas Dillard, I began, my voice carrying the parade ground authority I'd spent 20 years developing, served in the United States Marine Corps for 30 years. He enlisted in 1966, deployed to Vietnam in 1967, and saw combat in some of the fiercest battles of the war. Uncle Preston's face had gone pale. My brother was staring at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. My sister had her phone out, probably Googling my name. He was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor during the Battle of Hue City, I continued. He saved 3 Marines from a burning vehicle under enemy fire. He was wounded twice, once by shrapnel, once by small arms fire. He earned the Purple Heart both times and returned to combat both times. I held up the shadow box so everyone could see. He served his country with honor and distinction. He led men in the worst circumstances imaginable. And when he retired, he did so knowing that his service mattered, that he'd upheld the values of the Corps and protected the freedoms that allowed his family to build their comfortable lives. The church was absolutely silent now. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. My grandfather asked me to deliver these honors because he wanted you all to understand something. Service isn't measured in dollars or social media followers or real estate portfolios. It's measured in sacrifice, in integrity, in the willingness to stand between danger and the people you love, even when those people don't understand what you're standing against. I looked at Uncle Preston, at his frozen face, his clenched jaw. He also wanted you to know that I followed in his footsteps. I'm Colonel Ashley Dillard, United States Marine Corps. I've served for 22 years. I've commanded a Marine Expeditionary Unit, that's 2,000 Marines. I've deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. I've earned decorations I can't discuss publicly because the operations remain classified. My brother's mouth was open. My sister had dropped her phone. And for the last 15 years, I've let this family believe I work in administration. Not because I was ashamed of my service, but because every time I tried to explain what I actually do, I was told to keep it brief. To not make it about me. To remember that success is measured in things people can photograph and post and show off at parties. I turned back to the altar, where my grandfather's casket lay draped in an American flag. Master Sergeant Dillard knew better. He knew that some things matter more than comfort, more than image, more than fitting into the family narrative. I saluted. Slow, precise, holding it for a 3 count. Semper Fi, Grandpa. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your example. Thank you for setting me free. I lowered my salute and placed the shadow box on the casket. The church remained frozen. 300 people, none of them moving, all of them processing the fact that the family's dismissed youngest member was a combat-tested Marine Corps colonel who'd been letting them underestimate her for 2 decades. Father Thomas stepped forward. We will now proceed to Arlington National Cemetery for the interment. Colonel Dillard has arranged for full military honors. The Marine Corps will provide the detail. Uncle Preston found his voice. It came out strangled. Arlington? But we planned. We have a plot in the family cemetery. Master Sergeant Dillard specifically requested Arlington, Father Thomas said gently. It's in his will. Colonel Dillard has been coordinating with the military for the past week. My mother was crying, not the gentle tears from earlier, but deep, shaking sobs. My father had his arm around her, his face pale. My brother stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. You're a colonel? You command? He couldn't finish. 2,000 Marines, I confirmed. Most recently in Syria, before that Afghanistan, before that Iraq. But you said, you told us. I told you I worked for the Marine Corps. You decided what that meant. Uncle Preston was on his feet now, his face red. You let us think. All this time. I let you think what you wanted to think, I said quietly. Because it was easier than fighting for space in a family that had already decided military service was a quaint hobby, rather than a real career. Yennis had her hand over her mouth. Her perfect makeup was running. Oh my God, we've been... I told everyone you were. In administration, yes. But the things we said... I heard them. The church had erupted in whispers now, people pulling out phones, searching my name, finding my official military biography, finding news articles about the operations I'd commanded, finding the truth that had been public record the entire time, if anyone had cared to look. Father Thomas raised his hands. Please, let us maintain the dignity this service deserves. We will reconvene at Arlington at 2 p.m. For those who need directions, there are maps in the vestibule. People began filing out, slowly, still processing. They passed me with new expressions: shock, respect, shame. A few veterans in the crowd saluted. I returned each one. Uncle Preston stood frozen in his pew, staring at me. Finally he said, Why? Why what? Why did you let us? He gestured helplessly. Why didn't you make us listen? I tried. Once. You told me military careers had no growth potential and suggested I transition to corporate security. His face went gray. I remember. I'm sure you do. But you should have. Made you respect me? Demanded acknowledgement? I shook my head. I don't need your respect, Uncle Preston. I have the respect of the Marines I've commanded. I have the respect of the generals I've served under. I have the respect of the enemies I've faced down in combat zones you can't pronounce. I picked up the shadow box. I did this because Grandpa asked me to. Because he wanted his family to understand what they'd been dismissing, what they'd been too busy to notice. I walked past him toward the door. My mother caught my arm. Ashley, I need to get to Arlington, I said gently. There's a ceremony to coordinate. The Marine Corps doesn't wait. I'm so sorry. We didn't. I know. She was still crying. He was so proud of you. He talked about you all the time. But Preston he always steered the conversation away. "Mom, it's okay." "It's not okay. We should have listened. We should have looked." She squeezed my arm. At Arlington, can we talk after?" "Maybe, if there's time." I left her there and walked out into the June sunshine. 3 staff cars were waiting. Black Suburbans with military plates. Major Ybarra stepped out of the first one, dressed in service blues. "Ma'am," he saluted. I returned it. "I thought I told you it wasn't necessary." "With respect, ma'am, Master Sergeant Dillard was a Marine. We don't leave Marines behind, even at family services." He glanced past me at the church, where people were still emerging, shell-shocked. "How'd it go?" "Grandpa would have enjoyed it." "Good, we're ready to proceed to Arlington. The detail is waiting. Secretary of the Navy is sending a representative." "He didn't have to do that." "Yes, ma'am, he did. Master Sergeant Dillard's service record is remarkable. And word got around about his granddaughter." Ybarra smiled slightly. "The commandant himself might show up." I looked back at the church, and my family gathering in confused clusters, their phones out, their perfect narratives shattered. My brother was staring at the Suburbans, at Ybarra's uniform, at the reality he'd been too comfortable to acknowledge. "Let's go," I said. Arlington National Cemetery at 2 p.m. on a Saturday in June. The sun was high, the grass impossibly green, the rows of white headstones stretching toward the horizon like an endless promise kept. My grandfather's burial site was on a hillside overlooking the Potomac. The Marine Corps had sent a full honor guard. 8 Marines in dress blues, flags flying, rifles ready for the salute. A bugler stood at attention. The commandant himself had come, just as Ybarra predicted. 300 people from the church service had dwindled to about 50 who'd made the drive to Arlington. Uncle Preston was there, looking diminished. My parents, my siblings, some close family friends. The rest had probably gone straight to the reception, unable to process the afternoon's revelations. I stood at attention as the honor guard carried my grandfather's casket from the hearse. The flag had been precisely folded, every crease perfect. As they lowered him into the ground, the rifles fired, 3 volleys, the sound echoing across the cemetery. The bugler played taps. The notes hung in the air, mournful and perfect. The commandant himself presented me with the flag. He leaned in and whispered, "He was proud of you, Colonel." This was his way of making sure everyone knew it. "Yes, sir. You've served with honor, just like him." "Thank you, sir." He stepped back and saluted. I returned it. Then he turned to my family, my pale, shaken family, and said in a voice that carried, "Master Sergeant Dillard was a Marine's Marine. He served his country with distinction. And he raised a granddaughter who exemplifies the very best of the Corps. You should all be very proud." Uncle Preston looked like he might collapse. My brother had tears running down his face. My sister was filming everything, probably for Instagram, but for once I didn't mind. Let her followers see this. Let them see what real service looked like. My mother approached as the crowd began to disperse. She looked old, suddenly, fragile. "I never knew," she said. About his Bronze Star, about the combat, he never talked about it. He tried. People didn't want to listen. I should have listened. "Yes." Quote. She flinched. "And you, a colonel all this time, why didn't you force us to understand?" "Because I was tired of competing for your attention. Tired of justifying my choices. Tired of existing in the margins of a family that had already decided what mattered." "But we're your family." "Are you?" I looked at her. Because family listens. Family asks questions. Family doesn't dismiss 22 years of service because it doesn't generate Instagram content. My brother approached, hesitant. "Ashley, I don't." I held up my hand. "Not here, not today. This is about Grandpa." "But I need to." "You need to go to the reception, drink the wine Preston ordered, talk about how unexpected this all was. I have a flight to catch." "You're leaving?" "I have a brief at Camp Pendleton Monday morning. The Marine Corps doesn't stop because my family had a revelation." I walked toward the Suburbans where Ybarra was waiting. Behind me, I heard my sister's voice. "Wait, she's just leaving? Like that?" My mother, quieter. "Let her go." At the car, I paused and looked back. 50 people standing on a hillside at Arlington, my grandfather's grave fresh beneath the perfect grass, the honor guard marching away in formation. Uncle Preston was standing alone, staring at the headstone. As I watched, he dropped to one knee, his shoulders shook. Good. Let him grieve. Let him understand what he'd dismissed. Let him live with the knowledge that for 20 years, he'd had a combat colonel in his family and had treated her like an administrative assistant because it was more convenient than revising his worldview. Ma'am, Ybarra held the car door open. I climbed in. Dulles Airport. I have a flight at 7. As we drove away, I pulled out my phone. Texts from other officers. Congratulations on the service. Respect for my grandfather. Questions about when I'd be back. One message from the commandant's aide. General officer list comes out next month. Early word, you're on it. BG pins are waiting. Brigadier General, 1 star. The culmination of 22 years of service. I looked out the window at Arlington, passing by, rows and rows of white stones, each one representing a life of service, sacrifice, honor. My grandfather was home now, among his brothers and sisters in arms, where he'd always belonged. And I was free. Free from the empty space on the mantle, from the family narrative, from the expectation that I should shrink to make them comfortable. Grandpa had given me that freedom. His last gift, delivered from beyond the grave by a priest who understood that sometimes love means forcing people to see what they've refused to acknowledge. The car pulled onto the highway. Behind us, Arlington receded into the distance. Ahead, the rest of my career waited. 1 star first, maybe more later, and all of it earned through competence and sacrifice rather than family connections. I closed my eyes and whispered, Semper Fi, Grandpa, mission accomplished.